Will Rowan, and I'm joined by...
Go now.
Hi, I'm Will Rowan, and I'm joined by Hannah Nimmo, who's running for Community and Wellbeing Officer. So just to start, could you introduce yourself and why you're running for this role?
Of course. So my name is Hannah Nimmo. Contrary to popular belief, everyone calls me Hannah Nimmo, so it's turned into a campaign brand. I'm running to be your Community and Wellbeing Officer because wellbeing is at the heart of everything I do. Since I've come to university, everything I've done has basically been wellbeing related. I'm a psychology student. I've also been Vice President of Community and Wellbeing for Constantine College last year, and I'm President of Red Flag Campaign at the university as well. I'm also a member of the UC Women and Non-Binary Network as their campaigns officer. So I sort of have a lot of experience at this university, and I think I'm quite well experienced to be able to deal with all of our community and wellbeing issues. Similarly, I think we have a fantastic community here at York. It's what drew me to the university in the first place, and I think UC is a perfect way to develop that community and bring us and the City of York and all of our partners together to make a really good UC.
In your manifesto, you're drawing quite a lot of different sections, as in all, and the manifesto itself is in different sections. How do you say your experiences have let you draw up a manifesto that covers such a wide variety of areas? Yeah,
I think because I've had such sort of diverse experience, I think because I've done a lot of different things. Obviously, being Vice President of Community and Wellbeing in a college, you deal with a lot of different things, and sort of you deal with a lot of different student networks. So I've been part of the Liberation Welfare Network in USU for the past year, and obviously I work with all of the current part-time officers as part of that, and I think it's sort of enabled me to sort of have a really good idea of what sort of needs need to be met by a lot of students and a lot of different students' opinions. And obviously running a campaign whilst I've been at university as well, it's been a challenge, but it means you're able to make a really positive impact and make a change within the student community. And I think it sort of enables me to sort of really properly learn what sort of issues are faced by the students at the university and how to best tackle them, obviously in a sensitive and sort of really happy way for everyone.
It's interesting that you mentioned PTOs. I think especially as a role, community and wellbeing benefits from lots of interaction with the PTOs and bringing that experience on board. How would you yourself, as a SAB, amplify the work of PTOs?
I think the PTOs that we have in York are absolutely fantastic. I think having worked with them all for so long, the work that they do is completely invaluable, and I think obviously the community at York wouldn't run as effectively as it does without those part-time officers. And I think sort of being sort of community and wellbeing officer, you're sort of the head of all of those, and I think you have the platform to be able to sort of really raise what those different groups are doing, sort of what they're doing to benefit the students as part of those networks. So I think it's a really sort of vital role to have, and I think having that platform to raise that work, like obviously it's not fair for me to speak on behalf of communities that I'm not a part of, which is why it's so fantastic that we have so many part-time officers and volunteer officers who work so hard on behalf of their own respective communities, and I just want to be the voice that amplifies all of their fantastic work.
Thank you for that. So you mentioned in your manifesto that you want to lobby for the continuation of some of the financial safety nets put in place during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so obviously there was the Emergency Student Support Fund that was put in place because of COVID, and then obviously there's a few other like bursaries and grants and things like that, but I think having that emergency support in place should be something that's constant, because obviously COVID is something that's meant sort of financials have gone down. Obviously a lot of students who had jobs whilst at university couldn't go on to work, they've had to go on to furlough, and then obviously now we've come back, people are struggling to get jobs as well, because sort of the jobs that are sort of were there aren't there anymore, or like businesses have closed down. And I think other than that as well, there's a lot of other unanticipated financial costs that come with university that aren't covered by the pandemic and were probably there before the pandemic. So I started university, I'm in my third year now, so I started even before the pandemic, and even from my own experience of that, I think there's some financial strain that comes onto students regardless of whether there's a pandemic going on or not. And I think sometimes students don't feel like financially supported enough at the university, so if there's something that UC can do to continue those grants and continue the emergency support where it's necessary, I think there's nothing wrong with doing it.
So talking about kind of the more financial side of being a student, previous officers have ran campaigns such as Rent Rant, such as Busters, lots of campaigns that focus on specific issues as a community and wellbeing officer. Are there any that you think need particular focus?
I think with the climate and the way things are, sort of the general student population I think are quite unhappy with the way the housing market is looking in York at the moment. I think rent prices sort of going into the next academic year have hiked up quite significantly, and I think that's something that a lot of students aren't happy about. And then similarly there's been some issues with campus accommodation, returning students not being able to get onto campus, and I think that that's something that's really important to look at again and sort of reassess the housing and what is that the student union can do to sort of hold accountability to sort of private landlords, student letting agencies, and also university accommodation as well, because we all have a duty, like a responsibility to our students so that every student is happily housed. And if that's not the case, then UC needs to do something about it, because we're the people who represent the students' opinions, so it should be us who does something about it.
I think particularly in the last year, the actual allocation process has come under more scrutiny. I mean, we had undergraduate students living, of course, all over the place in Hull, some postgraduate students in Leeds, and also 700 postgraduate students missed out on accommodation last year. What changes would you like to see in terms of the application process and how accommodation is, especially on campus accommodation, is allocated in York?
Yeah, I touch on it a little bit in my own manifesto. I think there's sort of issues, and I think they've increased into this academic year with sort of the housing market being really spread out in terms of when their applications in the house viewings come in. So I believe that this year they've sort of ranged from starting in November going all the way up to campus accommodation only opening a couple of weeks ago. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on students to sort of sign student houses straight away. And then obviously if they've waited for university accommodation and then that's been sort of, there's less accommodation there than they thought there was going to be, that creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress for students. And obviously that's a wellbeing impact and also a community issue in that the housing's not there. So I would really like to try and work with sort of City of York Council and sort of our estate agencies and with the university itself to try and better align all of the applications processes so that everything comes out all at the same time, because I think it would just take a lot of pressure off students to do that as well.
There's one other issue that I think kind of affects every other issue in terms of community and wellbeing, particularly on campus of students. It's something that Your Vision recently reported on, which is about the complaints process, which has come under a lot of criticism. One source called it atrocious, and one student told Vision that they felt their attacker was being treated as the victim as part of the misconduct tool in the reporting process. Do you think the complaints process needs change?
I definitely think it does, yeah. I think that the way a lot of different things are reported at the university, there sort of needs to be a bit more of a radical reform on it, because I think there's so many things that students need to report and need to talk about, but they don't have the sort of place to do so and they don't have the means of being able to do so. And I think the complaints procedure is in some ways probably a bit sort of long and a bit complicated when it doesn't really need to be. If there's a complaint that needs to be made, it needs to be made. It shouldn't have to be a big massive process of going through all kinds of different forms and speaking to different people. It should just be a really straightforward process regardless of what the complaint is. And I think there's a lot of students that have been have faced issues that have been unanticipated. So for example, like anti-spiking and things like that, there's a lot of issues with raising complaints with that, and students haven't been happy with how that's been dealt with. And similarly, a lot more needs to be done in terms of that as well. So I think on the whole, yeah, there does need to be a lot of change in terms of that.
Just to round up in 5 seconds, why should people vote for you?
Because I'm the best person for the job.
Thank you for joining us. We now go over to Studio Red for our next interview.
Thanks, Will. I'm William, and I'm joined in Studio Red by